A Freedom of Information request by the Canadian Press shows that in Manitoba last year, 339 newborns were apprehended, just 47 fewer than in 2020 when the province said it stopped the controversial practice that notifies child welfare agencies when certain women give birth. Joining us now is Kelly Geraldine Malone, the reporter who broke this story. Kelly, thanks for being with us. We know in the 2 years since the government said it was putting an end to birth alerts that parents and advocates were saying they were still happening. What prompted you to get this data through a Freedom of Information request?
Well, I think I was probably hearing a lot of the same things as you, that parents were still worried that children and newborns were being apprehended despite the practice of birth alerts ending. But another part is that at the Canadian Press, in our reporting of child and welfare services in Manitoba, we often include a line that says, on average, one newborn is seized a day in Manitoba a year. And so I need to file Freedom of Information requests just to ensure that, when I put it in an article, remains true. And obviously with the end of birth alerts, we were looking to see if that number had dropped significantly and if that was no longer true. But last week, I had just received the information back from my last Freedom of Information request for birth alerts and for children seized between the ages of 0 and 12 months for the year of 2021. And it showed that hundreds of babies were still seized despite birth alerts ending.
So we know Manitoba has the highest number of kids in care per capita. Huge disproportionate number of those are Indigenous children. This started under the previous NDP government, but the current progressive Conservative government vowed to fix it. That's obviously not happened if only 47 fewer babies were seized. What else have you learned in covering this?
Well, I want to go back a little bit to how this actually came about. So last week I was in my office, and my office is in the provincial legislature, and so we were listening to question period, and I had just received that information that showed that hundreds of babies were still seized last year. And Families Minister Rochelle Squires said during question period that there was a 75% reduction in newborn at-birth seizures since the end of birth alerts. And immediately, those journalism senses start tingling because I obviously had my own database that showed that that wasn't quite true. Mm-hmm. So while I was looking into this, I ended up having to spend days just trying to clarify what the minister had said in question period because it didn't match the numbers that I'd received from the province themselves. So initially they said that she wasn't talking about at-birth newborns. She was talking about 0 to 12 months. And so I sent them the information that I had where that percentage didn't match up. There was no 75% reduction in the information that I had. And then they clarified again that she was actually talking about since 2016. And once again, I sent back my numbers and said, well, since 2016, I also have those numbers. That also doesn't equal a 75% reduction. And then there was a further clarification where they said they were hoping to reach a 75% reduction by the end of this year. So from what I learned from that is, I think a lot of people who report on child welfare and specifically the numbers around it know that it can be quite confusing, that definitions change. And I think something that I learned is that even within the government itself, there might be some confusion about just where we're at when it comes to child apprehensions.
Thankfully, you had your Freedom of Information requests. So has the government given any explanation as to why so little has changed?
Well, the government did not give a direct response to my questions asking for clarification around this. Minister Squires did speak in question period that all levels of government and all levels of community need to work together, and that there needs to be a new path forward when it comes to child welfare. But I did speak with advocates in the community who work with this, including Cora Morgan, the First Nations Child and Family Advocate. And she said that what she's seeing is mothers that are going home and then the child being apprehended. And so they might not fall into the category of an at-birth apprehension, but it's still a baby under the one year of age being apprehended. And she said what that means is that women are talking to each other and they're concerned. So the big reason why birth alerts were removed was that a report showed that it was discouraging pregnant women and their families from reaching out for prenatal support. So Morgan told me that mothers are still apprehensive about going for prenatal support because they feel like while they might not have the technical term of birth alert, they might still get flagged for being followed or watched or looked at by the child welfare system just for going in for prenatal supports.
Kelly, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate this and your reporting on it and keeping the government on its toes. Thanks.
Thank you.